Many American evangelicals believe that Jebel al-Lawz is the real Mount Sinai. However, despite the popularity of this notion, Jebel al-Lawz cannot be the real Mount Sinai. Find out why on this episode of Ancient Egypt and the Bible. As a scholar who specializes on the Exodus, I get a lot of people writing to me about why Jebel al-Lawz must be the real Mount Sinai. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Mount Sinai is the mountain that Moses was said to have received the Ten Commandments. The traditional site for Mount Sinai is located within the Wadi Firan in the middle of the Sinai Peninsula, near what is today St. Catherine's Monastery. However, the view we are about to discuss asserts a different location for Mount Sinai and suggests that it was located at Jebel al-Lawz on the western side of the Arabian Peninsula. Now, the idea that Jebel al-Lawz is the real Mount Sinai was a theory that was popularized by conman and false prophet Ron Wyatt. And various people have supported his claims over the years, including Bob Cornuke, Jim and Penny Caldwell, and more recently, Glenn Fritz, who inspired the third set of Patterns of Evidence films. Many claims have been made about the Jebel al-Lawz site and its proximity. And today, we will discuss the validity of 16 of those claims. This should provide a good start to being able to evaluate those claims. So, with that said, let's get into it. Claim number 1. The Israelites had to arrive at Nuweiba Beach because the Bible says they trekked through the mountains of the Sinai Peninsula in Exodus 14:3. Okay, now, the Nuweiba Beach is a small sandy beach area on the eastern Sinai Peninsula. You basically come out of the Wadi Firan and you enter into this sort of large expanse of coastal beaches. And the Nuweiba Beach is one of those beaches. Now, Exodus 14:3 says, quote, "They were entangled in the land, and the wilderness has shut them in." Okay. The text here makes no mention of mountains. Ron White interpreted wilderness to equal mountains. However, in Hebrew, wilderness doesn't exactly mean mountains, it means desert. So, the suggestion that the Israelites had to travel through mountains in this verse is eisegesis. It's adding reading a meaning into the text that is not actually there. Claim number 2. The large beach of Nuweiba is able to accommodate quite a few million people. Okay, just because you have a big beach doesn't mean millions of people were actually there. There is no evidence that 1 million people were even part of the Exodus. Modern estimates place the Exodus at about 5 to 100,000 people. This is based not only upon the demographics of the late Bronze Age Egypt, but also based upon newer lexicographical work that has been done for the Israelite censuses of numbers 1 to 2 and 26. So very few scholars today would suggest that the Israelite Exodus was 3 million people. That's out-of-date scholarship. Claim number 3. Nuweiba is short for Nuweiba al-Muzayina. Quote, "the waters that Moses parted or opened," end quote. Okay, the name Nuweiba al-Muzayina actually means bubbling springs. The name has no association with Moses at all. This is an example of a false friend. It's bad linguistics. Claim number 4. There is a stretch of beach sand here about 400 meters long that has sand fused together in large solid clumps. Bring this together with the fire column that separated the Egyptians and the Israelites just before the crossing. Okay, the sand at Nuweiba is like other sands of the eastern Sinai, in that it's fairly high in ferrite and is probably the result of erosion from the nearby mountains. There is no evidence that the sand was fused from a column of fire. I don't know even where they get this from. There's just no evidence for this. Claim number 5. There is an underwater sand bridge between Nuweiba and Saudi Arabia. Okay. There is no underwater sand bridge here. If there were, ships would get stuck on it all the time. The so-called sand bridge is 2,400 feet below sea level. The Bible states that the waters were parted from a wind from the east, Exodus 14:21. Essentially, a wind started blowing all night and parted the waters. The issue here is at water depths of 2,400 feet, there is no wind in this solar system that is powerful enough to part those waters. Frankly, at this point, the real miracle is not parting the waters, but that the Israelites weren't blown away by the wind and the flesh was not sandblasted off of their bones. Nuweiba is just not a viable site for the parting of the Sea of Reeds. Claim number 6. Chariot parts of the 18th dynasty, wheels with 4 and 8 spokes and even gold plating were found on the sea floor. There is no evidence that any chariot parts were found in the Gulf of Aqaba. The, quote, gold chariot wheel that was photographed by Ron White was a ridiculous fraud. All the other, quote, chariot wheels were coral formations, where, if they had been encrusted with coral, counting their spokes would not have even been possible. No one has found a real chariot wheel or part of a chariot wheel in the Gulf of Aqaba. And none of the coral formations have been shown to contain a chariot wheel. Those who claim that these are chariot wheels are applying pareidolia to coral foundations. Pareidolia, for those of you who are not familiar with that, is the idea that you can look up in the clouds and see a puppy. There's not really a puppy up in the clouds. Okay? Hate to break that to you. Okay? Your mind fills in a puppy among the formations of the clouds. So the clouds kind of look like a puppy and your mind fills in a puppy. Same deal here. These are coral foundations that their minds are filling in chariot wheels. But there's no actual chariot wheels here. However, even if a chariot wheel had landed in the water, its chances of lasting long enough to be encrusted with coral are practically zero, given that chariots are mostly made of leather and laminated wood. In salt water, leather rapidly decays and laminated wood springs apart. Moreover, the coral foundations found in the Gulf of Aqaba are just that. Natural coral foundations found all over the Red Sea. They're not restricted just to Nuweiba Beach. They're found everywhere in the Gulf of Aqaba. So it's not like the sea just dried up and Pharaoh's chariots were riding higgly-piggly all across the Red Sea. It's not how it works. They were supposed to be following the Israelites. So again, this is bad evidence. Claim number 7. Human rib cages and horses' hooves covered in coral were also found. None of those fallen remains can be dated to the Exodus itself. They are just animal remains out of context. So, for archaeological purposes, they are useless as evidence. But there's another problem too, was that the Sinai has had, throughout its history, from its prehistory until even fairly late, herds of wild horses. So just because we find pieces of horse remains out there doesn't mean they came from chariots. There's just no necessary connection between them. So unless you can date them, this is not evidence. Claim number 8. On both sides of this crossing site, granite pillars have been found that mark the site as the actual place of the crossing of the Israelites. Columns are easily dated from the designs used on the capitals. A capital is that little section at the top and the bottom of a column. And the pillar shown in the photographs is a column that dates to no earlier than the Nabatean period. That's the 2nd century BC. And despite the claim that the column has a Solomonic inscription of it, there has never been a publication of the inscription, and clear photographs of the inscription are not available. So it's impossible for us to even evaluate that, even if it is a genuine inscription, which we have every reason to doubt. Claim number 9. One of the most exciting markers along the rest of the route towards the real Mount Sinai is the split rock of Horeb. It stands out head and shoulders, so to speak, above the rest of the desert landscape. The area below the cleft rocks shows signs of a great body of water that caused erosion, smoothing the rock's surface. Okay. First, there is no mention of the rock being split in two in Numbers 20, verse 11. The closest that one finds to this is in Isaiah 48:21, where Moses broke open the rock. The use of the term split is a traditional interpretation that is being read into the translation of Isaiah 48:21. Moreover, the split rock in Saudi Arabia shows no evidence of ever being a spring. Cold water springs are caused by slate deposits that prevents water from seeping down into the layers of dirt and stone and forces the water to emerge on the surface. But there are no slate deposits near the split rock. No slate deposits, no spring. And the fact is that the erosion near that rock could be another type of erosion, such as wind erosion, which is very, very common in the region. Claim number 10. Ultimately, we end up at the real Mount Sinai at Jebel al-Lawz. Okay, this is a huge problem because the Bible states that Mount Sinai is on the west side of the wilderness of Midian, Exodus 3, verse 1, which covers Edom and the eastern Sinai. So Mount Sinai cannot be in Saudi Arabia. But there are many other reasons why it cannot be Mount Sinai, not the least of which is that it depends upon Pithom, Pihahirot, Balsaphon, Migdol, and the Sea of Reeds all being in the wrong places. Egyptian records, for example, Papyrus Anastasi III and the Onomastica of Amamope, state that the Sea of Reeds was between Charu, that's Tel Hebua, and Paramses, Kantir, and that Pithom, Pihahirot, Balsaphon, Migdol, and the Sea of Reeds are all near to each other. We know for certain where Pithom is located. It is in the Wadi Tumilat at Tel el-Rataba. And the Egyptian records place Pihahirot, Balsaphon, Migdol, and the Sea of Reeds in the northwest Sinai. That is going to make Jebel al-Lawz a very difficult sell as the real Mount Sinai. Claim number 11. On Google Earth, we can still see the campsite of the Israelites. There is no evidence to suggest that the Israelites camped in Mount Sinai. That's nothing but wild conjecture. Claim number 12. The altar of the golden calf was discovered at Jebel al-Lawz. Okay, what is often presented as a, quote, altar is a low trough of stones. That is not an altar. I have seen a lot of ancient Near Eastern altars. No Bronze Age altar ever looked like that. Claim 13. The pillars that Moses set up for the 12 tribes were found there per Exodus 24:4. Admittedly, the round stones found at Jebel al-Lawz look like the cross sections of rounded pillars, basically a pillar that was made by stacking these rounded stones. However, the problem here is going to be Exodus 24:4. Quote, "And Moses wrote down the words of the Lord, and he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel." End quote. The problem here is that what is translated into English as pillars doesn't mean columns in Hebrew. The word here is matzebot, which is a self-standing stone or stele, not a pillar or column. By showing us cross-sections of round stones, advocates for the Jebel al-Lawz view have shown us that these stones cannot be the 12 matzebot of Exodus 24:4. The word for columns as opposed to a standing stone in Hebrew is not matzebot, but amud. Essentially, the people who support this theory are not literate when it comes to Hebrew, and that shows in their archaeology. Claim 14. His altar and the corral for the cattle prepared for the offering. Okay, there does appear to be a corral there, but I didn't see any altar. A lot of way stations for migratory nomads had corrals. But again, just because there's a corral there doesn't mean that any of this belonged to the Israelites. Claim 15. There are petroglyphs that display Israelite symbols like the menorah. Again, the petroglyphs at Jebel al-Lawz have not been properly documented or published. However, they bear an exceptionally strong resemblance to Nabatean petroglyphs. This is even consistent with the use of Jewish symbols like the menorah, which are found at other known examples of Nabatean petroglyph sites. For example, Wadi Sidra. Claim 16. The blackened peak of Jebel al-Lawz also points towards the presence of some great heat or fire on top. The blackened peak of Jebel al-Lawz is from desert varnish, not oxidation from heat. Desert varnish creates a brown or black burnished varnish on stone, caused by mineral deposition combined with friction. Heat is not involved in the process at all. Desert varnish is a common phenomenon in the ancient Near East, and it's common enough that I even have a small sample of it right here. You'll notice here on this flint sample, on the back of it, it's fairly matte finish, but on the other side, it is quite shiny and smooth. So this is an example of desert varnish on a real piece of stone. So it's a common phenomenon in the ancient Near East. So there you have it, my response to some of the claims about Jebel al-Lawz being the real Mount Sinai. From every indication, it appears that the site was a Nabatean site that dates to no earlier than the 2nd century BC. There is absolutely no evidence of occupation by any Bronze Age peoples, including the Bronze Age Israelites. Once again, archaeology and the Bible refutes the claims of Ron Wyatt. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting. Thank you very much for watching. We hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.